not.
And we are live on Facebook with Donna Whitely. I'm really excited about tonight. I've been really looking forward to talking to you, Donna.
Oh, thank you, Michelle.
So I am Michelle Chronister. I am the social media manager for the Office of NFP, and I'm the one who's been lucky enough to get to talk to all our guests this week. It's been really fun. It's been good social interaction. So tonight we have with us the lovely Donna Whitely. She is our on-staff therapist for our Enkindle Infertility Ministry. So she's going to be talking to you a little bit about that, answering your questions. So be sure to pop your questions down below in the comment section. We've been getting some good questions the last few nights, and the team will feed them on over to us so that we'll be able to answer them. So Donna, why don't we start by talking a little bit, or you can just introduce yourself to us and talk about your family, where you're from, all that good stuff. You went to high school in St. Louis, right?
I did.
Okay, so you can say what high school you went to.
It's not in existence anymore, so people might be like, I don't know about that. I went to Mercy High School, so that's kind of.
Where was that one?
It was in University City.
Okay.
So, right, went to Catholic grade school and high school, and graduated from college and actually in secondary education. So I taught for 14 years.
I know that.
And my life is kind of an example of when you have your life all planned out and something else happens. You know? So
we make plans and God laughs, right?
There you go. About 14 years into it, I thought I was being nudged to do something else. And so, but I didn't know what. I just knew I was confused, frustrated, and tired. And I was hoping God would give me direction, and he did. And went back to school, became a therapist. I've been a therapist for almost 30 years now. Oh. And I know, long time.
I didn't realize you were a teacher though before that, so that's kind of cool to hear that backstory.
Yeah, 7 through 12. So I sometimes when I do my resume and I tell people that, and they're like, well, you have been a therapist for 30 years, but you really have 14 years of internship. And that's really the truth, because anybody who teaches that aid understands that there's a lot of counseling going on there.
Oh yeah, that's good background, good context.
I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I made the change, because I thought something that was really across, like my love was teaching, and I trusted, and I found out there's this joy and peace that I would have never imagined if I would have held on too tightly.
That's really neat. I always love hearing how people discern where it is that God's calling them to work, and so that's a really cool story. Is your family all in St. Louis too?
Everybody's here. I have a sister that lives in Atlanta, but everybody else is here.
Nice. Very nice. Awesome. So you touched on this already a little bit, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for a living, and then we can kind of go into talking about Enkindle and all of that.
Okay. I feel like they're one and the same a lot of times. I am a therapist in private practice, and I've been doing this for such a long time. You know, you start out working with kids, and then the parents want to come in, and then you start working with couples, and then you start working with friends, and it just kind of expands. And depression is depression, no matter what you're feeling with. Frustration is frustration. And so I feel like I just do a lot of different kinds of counseling.
Yeah.
And then with Enkindle, I work with couples who are living with infertility. Mm-hmm. The way Enkindle started was a client of NFP came in and talked to me because she wanted some place that was safe and non-judgmental, that she could just talk about her experience. Mm-hmm. She had a doctor, and the doctor was great, but she needed more. And she and her husband needed more. So and there was no place that kind of aligned with her Christian values. So we started a group, and the group was great. The women in the group were awesome. Sometimes the husbands came. It was really good. We had to kind of stop the group because everybody became a mother in some way. And so then we decided, let's try individual, because sometimes people have never, ever told their story.
Yeah.
And it's scary. And as soon as they start telling it and they feel safe, or like someone's listening, or they're not going to say, well, you just have to go do in vitro and then you can have a baby, because I know 6 people who did that. And,
right.
they just feel like they don't get it. I'm not doing that. And then the tears come, and then their husbands kind of don't know what to do because they want to fix it.
Yeah.
And
they're good at that, aren't they?
it's awesome though. It's how God made us. And
right. So
I think what Enkindle does is we changed the name of the group. The group originally was the Infertility Support Group. How uplifting is that? Yeah, let's go. Where are you going?
The Infertility Support Group.
Exactly. So we talked about it and said, let's change it to something more hopeful. And we came up with the word Enkindle. Because when couples come in, their embers are pretty soft. And so we just keep putting kindling on it until you can do it yourself, just to give you hope that you're gonna be okay. And there is a plan. Yeah. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah. And especially, it's kind of been beautiful how each of the interviews this week seem to be building on each other. It's just like we didn't plan it that way, but it seems like I keep referring back to previous ones because you all are kind of talking about different aspects of this journey. And something we were talking about with both Dr. Young and then also with Erin last night was the fact that not everyone's infertility story ends with a baby. And it doesn't mean that you failed, because a woman's health in and of itself is a valuable thing. Mental and emotional and physical and the whole picture. So I think that's also something kind of beautiful about this, is it gives people a safe place to talk about the fact that sometimes those stories don't have the ending they were anticipating.
And Michelle, thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that is the true beauty of the Enkindle group. To teach women, men and women, that their purpose is not over if they don't have a child.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. I went to Mother's Day Mass, and I always get nervous around Mother's Day, because at the end of the Mass, historically, the priest says, okay, all the moms stand up and they give it a blessing. And I know my couples. And so I see the husband may grab the wife's hand or put her on. And the same thing happens on Father's Day, by the way. So one Mother's Day, I went to Mass, and the priest had everybody stand up for the final blessing. And then he said, now there's a special blessing for mothers, which is fine, because I love mothers. I love my mother. I think mothers are wonderful. And he just gave the blessing, and everybody was standing up. And so after church, I went up to Monsignor, and I'm not that person that goes up to the priest. I think everybody wants to talk to the priest after Mass, and I just feel sorry. But I was just so touched that he was so considerate. Yeah. And I said, thank you so much. It wasn't a big thing, but it really meant a lot. Yeah. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Donna, I have one mother, one biological mother, but I have so many mothers who have formed me into the person I am. And then he said, because you are a woman, by birthright, you are a mother.
It's so true too, yeah.
And because your husband is a man, by birthright, he is a father.
Yeah, right.
I took that, and I realized then all of our kids aren't going to come wrapped in little bundles of joy.
Mm-hmm.
It might be the elderly woman across the street.
Yeah.
It could be a niece or a nephew. We don't know.
Right.
But we have to be like the bonus mom. And even parents who have kids need bonus moms. So be that person. Don't let yourself get stuck in the grief of this. It is hard. And there are physical things going on with your body, and you're, having to take all these hormones or whatever, surgeries. We heard Dr. Young talk about that. And it's hard, and you will have those days when it's hard. But hang on. And if you can't hang on, reach out to someone.
Yeah, so well said. I think especially what's hard about it is it's such an invisible struggle. Like it's misunderstood and it's invisible. And I feel like there's also a stigma in the Catholic world because, I don't know how many times I've heard someone say, oh, they're a good Catholic family. They have 7 kids. I'm just like, like that doesn't necessarily mean they're a good Catholic family.
Exactly.
Or it doesn't mean that the family that doesn't have any kids that you can see isn't a good Catholic family. We have a little one in heaven. People could look at our family and think, oh, why don't they have more kids? Like they've been married X number of years. And I have best friends who the only children they miscarried. And then, I have other friends that have never been able to conceive, and that doesn't make them not a good Catholic. But I think that there's this stigma where it's like if people see a couple at mass that's going to mass and don't have any children, they think, oh, that couple must be contracepting, which makes them feel even more isolated because they're doing everything right and they're not doing IVF maybe so that they can be faithful to church teaching, and they're just getting it from every side. And I think that's the beauty of Enkindle, is that it sees them in their struggle, because it's such a unique struggle, I feel like, to be faithful to the church teaching in terms of how you're getting everything treated, but then to be looked at as if you're doing it all wrong,
So true. So true. And I think you're so right. And oftentimes this stigma is within the couple. It is a silent dilemma. A lot of times they don't talk about it. Their families don't even know. And that's another thing. So they come in and we talk about it, and we give that, for lack of a better term, monster under the bed a little air. And, it's kind of like, you don't grow 6 heads, the lights don't flash, you said it out loud and it's okay. And there's another person that can pray for us then, So I encourage couples, you don't have to go into details. It's your story, but talk to your family about it. And because you're going to go to another Christmas or Thanksgiving or another baby shower, and you'll be sitting there kind of sad, and people won't know why you're sad.
Right. Yeah. Because it's a very unique sort of grief, because there's the grief that's like if you've lost a child. But then too, I've never had primary infertility, but I've had secondary infertility previously. And it's also just the grief of every cycle mourning the child that could have been that cycle. Because, you're mentally calculating my due date's going to be that day. And that's a kind of grief that's just completely invisible, because people are like, why are you sad? Like nobody died. And you're like, no, but there could have been a child this cycle, and I really thought this was going to be the cycle, and now there isn't. And that's just something where people are just not understanding of that. But it's a very, very real, very, very strong grief. And if you're sitting in a family gathering feeling that grief, it's easy to just feel invisible, So yeah. And the stream too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's so true. And I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
That a lot of times I'll get crisis calls, and that's right after the woman has started her period, because you're so hopeful, and then you feel like those hopes are dashed. And then it's like, okay, we got to wait another month, and we've waited so long, and when is this going to be over? And it's kind of, if you share it with your family, and again, not everything, and only what you want to, and you talk about it with your husband, and that's the other thing about the couples that I work with. They are the strongest couples I know. They are talking about things nobody else talks about in their marriage, because most people just take it for granted. And there's such a closeness there, and it's such a bond that we kind of feel like we don't need anybody else. And maybe you don't, but you need their prayers. And not the prayers that you're going to conceive, but just that you'll be able to follow God's plan. And if you do, something better than you ever thought possible was going to happen. I've seen it with people that have chosen adoption. I've seen it with people who have chosen neither, but somebody special came into their life.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think too, also, I like that you're highlighting the couples, because I think that husbands experience it very differently than their wives do.
Absolutely.
And even just like that tension, it can just be such a weight on a marriage. And I think the more it stays within that couple, it just feels like a bigger and bigger weight. And if you can find someone to support you outside of your couple and affirm that, like, your wife isn't crazy, you're not doing anything wrong, husband. Like, everybody's just, we're grieving through this in different ways, and it helps alleviate some of that burden, I think. And so I think it's beautiful that this outreach is also to both people in the couple, not just like the wife or just the husband or whatever. So
it really is, because the husband doesn't understand it. I see it even with people who have achieved pregnancies. Oftentimes the baby's not real until the dad holds it to the dad.
oh, it's so true. Yeah.
But the mom is carrying the baby for 9 months and knows the baby. Now, if you flip it to a couple who's struggling with infertility, the dads are trying, but they don't get it. Or even with a miscarriage, they've lost a child too.
Mm-hmm.
But even in really healthy people, the woman always thinks it's her fault.
Right. That's so true. Yeah.
And no matter how many people tell us it's not, we have to check in with that all the time. Like, it wasn't the plan. You still have a baby if you have a miscarriage.
Right.
They're just taking care of you in a different way.
It's so true. I always tell people my little Gabriel is just like, we keep him busy in this family.
There you go.
Please pray for your sisters.
And you know what? Maybe that was Gabriel's purpose.
I know, right? It's been beautiful just seeing different ways that I will turn to him and ask for his intercession and then see the results. I'm just like, my favorite child. Not really, but sometimes.
Right.
No, so that's really great. We actually already have some questions. So we'll start in on those. The first question was, how might one start the conversation with family about infertility?
That is a great question. I think you just have to sit down and tell them that you're trying and you're doing it your own way. You just really hope that they support you. And that you don't need their sympathy. Mm-hmm. Every time you walk into a room, you don't want them to be sad because you're sad enough.
Yeah.
But maybe they could just tell them what you're going through. I've been to a doctor. This is what they've determined. This is the plan of action we've determined that we want to take because this works best in our marriage. Mm-hmm. And we're trusting, and we just hope you do with us.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's great. And I think too, it's helpful to manage your expectations about family reactions.
Exactly.
Because, some family members that you thought would be super supportive might not be, and then somebody might completely surprise you, and it's beautiful when you get those surprises. But even if somebody doesn't get it, it doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they're not trying to support you. It's just one of those things that it's hard for people to understand if they haven't been there.
And I think the other thing is the couples have been working with this for a long time. So they've known they've been trying. Sometimes the family didn't know. And so you're kind of dropping a bombshell on them. And so their reaction isn't as processed as we might want it to be. And they will say some insensitive things, but that's not their intention. That's not their intention at all. And we have to hold that in mind.
Yeah.
that sometimes people are going to have missteps with this, but then it's our job to teach them what
Right.
we know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And in a healthy family, people will be
Exactly.
supportive of that.
That's exactly
Um,
right.
so before I get to this next question, I had a question that I wanted to ask you, and hear how you would explain it. What would you suggest for family members or close friends who have a loved one going through infertility? How should they respond? What should they say? What shouldn't they say? What would be the best way they could support that couple?
And this is assuming that they know
Right.
that, great.
Right. Yeah.
What I suggest to people, because I get that question a lot, because it's really hard for our moms to see us go through this.
Right.
And they don't know what to say, and they don't want to say the wrong thing because
Right.
all of a sudden their daughter's crying and they feel horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tell them is just kind of be aware. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, but if you're at a family function and all of a sudden you see your daughter, your niece, your friend, whoever, kind of shut down or get quiet, don't make a big deal about it, but maybe walk over to them and sit by them, or put your arm around them, or give them a smile or a wink. Sometimes you don't always have to say something, because the other thing, the less we talk, and you can't tell that from this conversation tonight because I feel like I'm the little, but the less we talk, the more they will.
It's so true. Just like the power of our presence.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful advice. Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all, and just to be a safe place for them. And I think, even as a parent, like, you want to fix it for your kids. And so that's always like the desire, but sometimes just those best comments are the ones that just say, we're here with you. I'll never forget, during one of our stretches of secondary infertility, my mother-in-law came up to me, and she had read like a blog post that I wrote about it, my experience with infertility. And she was like, I just want you to know that we support you. And even if you're not able to get pregnant again, you're not disappointing us. And it was just like, it was such a relief to hear that, because especially I think you have this like, I want to give grandchildren to like the parents and everything. And but just to have that permission that like, this isn't about us. We know this is about you guys, and we're here for you. And so it wasn't like she sat down and had a long conversation. It was just that simple affirmation that I see you, I see your pain, and we love you guys right where you're at, which is really great. I will throw in one thing that always makes me cringe is whenever people ask a newly married couple, so when are you having kids? Because you're just like, they might be trying, they might have been trying for a while, and sometimes even I'll be in a situation where I hear someone ask that, and I know that couple is struggling with infertility, and I'm just like, oh, I have no idea how much pain they're in right now. So I always tell people, never ask that question, just never ask it ever.
Well, another question that gets asked a lot, whether you're just married or married a while, first question is, how many kids do you have? And if you say none, it's a showstopper. People don't know what to say.
Right.
And so, I always say God had other plans for us or something, but you have to kind of come up with something that you feel comfortable, and that's just your pat answer.
Yeah. That's so true.
It's your story, and you can tell as much of it as you want, and you don't have to tell any of it, but
yeah,
own it.
And I know from my experience, but other people that I know too, it's even more, it becomes a different kind of complicated if you have anyone that you've lost, because then you're just like, do I count them? Because the person at the grocery store the counter doesn't always want to hear like, well, I lost a child. It's just like, what? And one of my very best friends, she only has one little one, and he's in heaven. And so, people see her and think, oh, you don't have any children. They wouldn't even ask her. And if she were to answer, she'd be like, I have a child, but she can't see him. And it's just, people just need to be so sensitive, I think, when they ask those questions, because you might get the honest answer, and you need to be understanding if you do, because you asked a loaded question. It's just the more we can understand, I think, where people are coming from, the better.
I think that's true. And infertility is not treated like anything else. Like if someone has cancer, they ask for prayers. They talk to people about it.
Nobody blames you for having cancer either.
Exactly.
Well, you shouldn't be getting chemo right now. You should be doing this instead. Like, people don't give you their input into,
You're so right. You're so right. And so in presenting stuff to family, you just you tell them, this is what we're going through right now, and this is what we're doing about it.
Yeah. Okay, so now enough of my questions, because I actually have some questions from our Facebook page. Now that everything is virtual, how might one access the Enkindle ministry?
The way you can call the office, and they will call me, and I will call you, and we can do a phone conversation and kind of just see where you are and how I can help. Mm-hmm. And hopefully someday we'll be able to get back in the office and have some meetings, depending on how things open up. But for right now, we're kind of doing phone calls at this time. And once you contact me, first of all, you get on my prayer list. And second of all, you can call me anytime, which is kind of the neat thing about Enkindle, because when we had a group, you kind of had to hold it all. If you were having a bad day in the middle of the month before the next meeting, I was like, oh, and then by that time you were feeling better. And so, but you can just call for a check-in and say, this just happened and I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. So that's how we're doing it virtually.
That's good. I mean, and that's just having someone to touch base with in the midst of all that too. It's just so powerful. And I can speak from experience too, that you have a very reassuring voice, as everyone now hears. And I would love to just call you on a bad day. Just say, Donna, please. So yeah, I mean, that's just beautiful, because it means you're not alone. So, okay, next question. How can every single diocese make this information about support groups, etc., accessible? So I guess, like, what would you, I'm not sure if this person meant diocese or parish, so maybe address both. Like, how can we, what should parishes do? Like, if a priest is watching this or hearing about this, like, can he reach out to you directly if he has a couple come to him?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just, we're the only diocese, I think, in a lot of places that do this. So it is tough. And you have to have the person who's going to kind of follow the guidelines of the church. Because again, the reason it started is because there was nobody that was out there saying, try IVF, or that was saying, don't do that, so in order to get it into your parishes or whatever, if you call our office, we can just talk about, how to do that and what would be feasible.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I imagine too, even as we were talking about this and thinking about the fact that when you're struggling, with depression or grief or anxiety, the last thing you want to do is to have to try to find your own therapist that meets your specific needs. So I feel like that's the other gift of this program, is like, we've got one and we can verify that, like, she knows where you're coming from. She talks to couples like you all the time. And so, I mean, especially for a priest, if he's counseling a couple and they're struggling with infertility, it's a lot of legwork for him to try to find a therapist that will be a Catholic therapist, but also specializes in infertility and is familiar with natural family planning methods and NAPRO and all that stuff. So it's nice that, they can just call into our office. So we know someone, got a name.
And sometimes it's not even like to set up a whole program. It can just be like what you asked for earlier. What do we say to people?
Yeah.
Because everybody doesn't want a therapist either. They just they just want to be told it's going to be okay, and no matter what happens, I'm not going to feel like this for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's so great. So kind of a follow-up to that, and thinking, this is going to kind of build on our upcoming ones. Tomorrow night, we're having one of the transitional deacons that just got ordained. And then the following night, we're having Father Sampson, and he's going to give us kind of the priest's perspective. So thinking about this, how can priests support couples who are facing infertility? And like, what kind of, you gave the beautiful example of Mother's Day and Father's Day. Obviously, no priest should ever ask, like, so do you have any kids? How many kids do you have? And then be shocked and, you know, assume a couple's contracepting or whatever. But aside from all that, what can a priest do or a transitional deacon do to try to support families that are facing infertility or secondary infertility? Because I feel like that one's a whole other like trickiness, because people see that you're, I mean, if you're struggling with infertility, they're like, well, but you already have a kid. So why are you sad? You know, like, just be grateful that you have the one you have. But for a couple facing secondary infertility, it's a heavy cross. So what suggestions would you have for pastors, for priests, for seminarians and deacons, for anyone who ministers to these couples?
Some of the priests that I've talked to said it's really difficult for them because they have family members and, you know, they have friends and couples that come and talk to them, and they can't imagine because they're celibate and they've never had that. I have to have a biological child. And so they do struggle with it. And they're even confronted with that with some of the couples. The very best thing that I think that somebody can do is just say, just tell me your story. And somebody told me a long time ago, and this is really good advice for everybody. If you listen to somebody, they'll tell you what they need. And if you listen really closely, they'll tell you what they need to fix it.
That's so true.
So you're just given, they've told you what they need. And then they think you're really smart too, because but they've
figured that out, Father.
It's so good. You know, that's and that's what they need to just, they know everything, everybody's individual with this. But you got to listen, and then you give them what they told you they needed.
That's so true. And I think even a big piece of it, I would imagine, is just being seen by your pastor or by your associate priest or whoever, and knowing that they see you and know what you're going through. Because I think otherwise, like, I'm thinking back to when we were trying for our second child, and we had this one kid that was getting to be older and older and older. And, you know, I would just sit there and think, oh, what do people think? Do they think we're contracepting? Do they think like, but we had, actually our pastor at the time was Bishop Rivatuso, and he's amazing. So that solved that problem. But I mean, like, him knowing what we were going through, it made me feel like, okay, at least my pastor knows what I'm dealing with. And I think there's something so beautiful and powerful about just a couple knowing that they're just seen, that what they're going through is their pastor is aware of it, their priest is aware of it, and he sees them and he doesn't judge them. I think there's something powerful just in that being seen because of how invisible this struggle is.
I totally agree. And thank you for saying that, because I also want to say that through Enkindle, we have an In Your Hands program. And if people want to, we have a connection with seminarians, and they give their name to a seminarian and he prays for them. And it can either be anonymous, or you can actually have the seminarian contact you. And so
that's right. I love, you're doing my work for me. That's our connection to tomorrow night. It really is just like, it's been beautiful to just flow one to the next.
The way it unfolded, and it wasn't planned.
You think it was the Holy Spirit or something.
Maybe.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'd want to ask you before we let you go here. I guess speaking back again to couples and that dynamic there, what recommendations do you have for a husband whose wife is, you know, either facing something like miscarriage or is facing infertility, and he loves her and wants to support her and doesn't want to say the wrong thing, but he's not feeling it the same way as her? What can he do to help her through that and to be a support? So it brings them together. Because I know you were saying a lot of these couples are just super close because they're able to talk so well. But for some couples, I know it does take them farther apart. So really, what suggestions would you give for that spouse or for that wife and how she communicates with her husband about it?
I think the first thing that, you sit down with each other, and I think one of the wounds of infertility that people don't get is it's not like, I'll take care of myself if we don't have a child. I know I'm going to be okay, but you'd be the best dad, and I'm not giving you a child.
Yeah.
And the husband's feeling the same way.
Yeah.
And so kind of just to share that with each other, and then say, I don't understand what you're going through, because the woman doesn't understand what the man's going through either, because they're not talkers.
Right.
We talk things to death, and then we come back and talk about them again. And then our husband's like, I thought that was fixed. And
I'll say, but what can I do about that? And like, no, just listen, please just listen.
And ask each other, help me understand how this is for you. And then the wife has to ask the same thing of him. Help me understand. And it will be different. It could be something like, I feel like you don't think I'm enough.
Yeah.
That there's no joy in our marriage anymore because you're so focused on having a child. And if we don't have one, then we don't exist. And really talk about that. I loved Dr. advice about the marital embrace. Talk about it.
Yeah. Because it puts a huge strain on that aspect of marriage. If, it's just like a very utilitarian thing. It's like, no, it's also for the bonding. And it's so easy to forget that when you're trying to conceive. So that hits on another point that I want to make sure we touch on, which would be, what would your advice be for couples who are in the midst of that, who are very hyper-focused? How can they connect in a meaningful way so that they can get through that time together without feeling like everything is about them trying to conceive?
I think, and this has to do with part of the NFP program called SPICE, and that's when you're not trying to achieve what you can do to still be intimate, and just kind of use some of those things. And you know what? Sometimes take a break, because when you're starting to feel like you're pushing too hard, you probably are. And you need to step back and say, it's okay. It really is okay for us just to take a month off, or take a week off and not talk about it and just enjoy each other again. Date. I had one couple, and they would be sad every time the woman started her period. And so they decided that they were going to have a glass of wine, because if she was pregnant, they wouldn't be able to have a glass of wine. So, you just kind of figure out those new traditions for yourself, and how you're going to make it through.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Okay, I'm trying to remember if there was something you said there that I wanted to capture on. I think I lost it. It was like something good too that we hadn't hit on yet. With couples and their connection and forming those new traditions. Oh, that was it. This is important. One last thing I really want you to talk to speak about is this whole dynamic that people have, in which they assume, well, if you can't conceive, you can just adopt then, right? But not every couple's called to adoption. So can you talk to that a little bit?
I can, because I have heard that one before. And then they feel guilty because that's what everybody says. Like, well, you can adopt. That's a tough thing to do if that's not what you're called to do.
Right. Yeah.
And I would just say that they're working, God's going to send them a child some way. And it doesn't even, and go into, it can be, I'm going to take care of grandma, or I'm going to take care of nieces and nephews, or whatever. We are just not called to that. And that's okay, because it's a scary thing, and you have to be called to it for it to work. And you can't think you're missing the calling, or you're not paying attention.
Right.
that's an uphill battle as well.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't realize that children never come as a blank slate. So a lot of people think, well, but if you just get a newborn but I mean, like, babies bond with their biological mothers in the womb. So it's like, I mean, I know of people that have adopted and then have had a child that has trauma, even though they adopted at birth, because that still is a separation. And so I think it's like it really is a calling, because you have to be prepared for the fact that that child might need additional support that that child wouldn't need if they came out of your body. And so, yeah, I think people don't always understand that, it's not just this thing that gets handed to you, but it's a person that already has 9 months of experience bonding with another person. And it's tricky, and then even getting into foster care, it's just, you're called to it because you're loving that child, not to fill your need to have a child.
And that is exactly what I was going to say. First of all, it is a beautiful thing if you're called to that.
Right.
It is not a beautiful thing if you push it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that families, God provides you with the family, and you just have to hold on to that. And if you're not feeling good about it, then it's not the decision you're supposed to be making. God's trying to direct you in another direction, and you're just beating yourself up because you're not called to that. Again, it's a beautiful thing if that's what you're called to.
But not if you're not, yeah.
If you're not feeling it.
And you're not a failure if you don't feel called to that.
Absolutely.
Because there's nothing that says that you have to have a child, and if you don't, you failed as a Catholic couple. Like,
absolutely.
No, God's my plans.
I really and truly think then you just be the bonus parents.
Yeah. And I mean, that's such a gift in and of itself, like that, which actually hits on one more thing, because I could talk to you all night, but I wanted to make sure we talk about this one last thing, which is lots of times I think if people have not experienced infertility themselves before, and even if they have, and they have a friend maybe who's trying to get pregnant at the same time as them, and then they get pregnant, or they were pregnant at the same time and then their friend lost the baby and they deliver, there's this sort of automatic hesitancy to want to, well, I don't want to share my baby or my pregnancy with this person because I don't want them to feel bad because they don't have a baby. I know from my own experience that the friends that did share their babies with me, it was very healing. Like, I remember specifically, I had a godson who was born right before I lost my baby, and his mother like made a point of really sharing him with me and letting me hold him. And it was so healing to have that spiritual motherhood to comfort me in the time of that loss. So if you could just like speak to that, and any thoughts that you have about that in terms of, do people need to be worrying about this? How can they approach it with somebody who is dealing with infertility, so that, I know especially as part of this too, just kind of throw that in there, I also know a lot of couples that are Catholic couples that don't have children because of infertility kind of get left behind when all their friends start having children. So what can couples that do have children do to support their friends who do have infertility but who still want to be a part of their family? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you just take the temperature, and you be very honest with them and say, I do have a newborn, and I would love for you to help me parent this newborn. And I want them to know you. I love you, and I want them to grow up loving you. How do you feel about that? And there may be days they don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But as time goes by, they will, so keep them in the loop. And the other thing is, if your friends are having their 4 kids, invite the couples over. They're great fun. The kids are like so excited when somebody besides mom and dad are there.
Right.
Tell them not to do something and things like that.
So
don't be afraid to include them, and if you are, just ask them.
Yeah, I think that's important too, the asking them and giving them an out, mm-hmm. if that's not the place that they're at, and I think too, depending even on where a woman is in her cycle, she may be more or less open to that and sometimes needs space to grieve. I know one good piece of advice I had heard somebody say was that, if you do find out you're expecting and you have another friend who was trying at the same time and hasn't conceived, to find a way to share that news with them so that they don't just see it on social media, but also so that they're not like face to face, like, oh, I'm having a baby. What do you think about that? You know? So I know one thing I've heard is somebody suggesting like writing them a letter or an email so that they have a chance to read it and process it themselves and say, you know, you don't need to express happiness for me or anything. I just want to make sure you're in the loop, and you're free to feel however you need to feel about this. I understand.
It's true. It's true. I think you said it earlier, and it's so true. We feel invisible, and then people treat us like we're invisible.
Right.
So that email, that phone call, that special visit says you're not invisible. You're a very important part of me.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, I know I said that was the last one, but we did have one more question come through, and I think this is an important one. I will try to connect you probably personally to this person. I'm not going to read her whole comment. Well, actually, I will read her comment, but I won't say her name in case she doesn't want that. She says, we've been through NFP, fertility treatments, pregnancy that led to miscarriage, now being failed through adoption. We're dealing with constant failure. I think a lot of couples have experienced a story like that, and it's incredibly painful. What would you say to this woman and to couples who are facing a similar situation?
I would say, I am really sorry, because you feel like you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
And most of the time, when we work really hard for something, we get what we want. And fertility is not like that. You know, and just acknowledge their frustration. Again, let them talk about them. Let them cry. Let them throw things with me. Whatever they want to do. Because another thing that happens is they don't want to walk around like their cross is any harder than anybody else's. And well, I've only been trying this long, and these people have been trying 7 years. And so what do I, it's your cross. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out things that'll work for you. It's hard to give a cookie cutter response. It's a lot easier when you're with that person.
So we do encourage, well, I'll make sure to reach out to her with the message and let her know so she has your information if she wants to.
And there's no pressure. And she, you know, she might be saying, I'm sorry, I asked that question. She's gonna give it. I'm not going to contact you. When you're ready, if you're ready, you'll get my number.
Here, that's right. Absolutely. Well, Donna, like I said, I could talk to you all night, but I'm going to let you go. They'll hang on for a minute after we log off here. Everybody else, thank you for joining us tonight. Please do share this lovely talk with your friends, especially if you have a friend or a couple that you know who's facing infertility, because it is such a lonely cross, and it really is a blessing to talk about it and to have it seen a little more. So stay tuned tomorrow night. I'm excited because we have one of my favorite seminarians joining us, transitional deacon Charlie Archer. So he just got ordained to the transitional diaconate a few months ago. Masks and all, it was exciting. So he's really excited to get to talk with all of you. We're going to do something a little bit different. He might have some questions for all of you. So tune in and share your wisdom with a seminarian. Get to be part of the formation process of a young man who in less than a year is going to be one of our priests here in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. He could be your future pastor, so make sure he's going to know what he needs to know. So that's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. We'll be chatting with Deacon Charlie Archer. Thank you so much, Donna. This is an absolute delight to get to have this time with you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.